He grew up in a part of the city where buildings stood too close together, and the streets were always busy with noise. Vendors shouted prices, children chased each other between shops, and bikes zipped past without warning. In the middle of all that chaos, there was one quiet corner he loved the most. It was behind an old repair shop, beside a stack of wooden crates and discarded metal parts. This was where he found the broken keyboard. It wasn't really a keyboard anymore. Half of the keys didn't work, and some were missing completely. The plastic was cracked, the buttons stuck, and the power cord needed to be twisted a certain way just to turn on. Most people wouldn't even stop to pick it up. But for him, it was treasure. It was the first instrument he ever touched. He didn't know much about music, but he knew how it made him feel. When he pressed a working key and heard even the faintest sound, it was like a tiny spark of light in a place that often felt dark. The sound wasn't clean or smooth, but it was enough to make him dream. He would sit there every afternoon, legs crossed, back leaned against a crate, playing whatever tune came to his mind. People who passed the alley sometimes laughed. Some would pause and look at him the way adults look at something strange but harmless. Kids from the neighborhood often teased him. They called him the scrap player because the only instrument he had came from the trash. He tried not to let their words hurt him, but some days it became harder than others at once. A boy a little older than him walked by with his group of friends. They stopped and watched him play for a moment. The older boy smirked and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Look at him. He plays for scraps." The others laughed, and he pretended he didn't care. He smiled weakly and said, "Yeah, I guess I do." But inside, the words stung deeper than he wanted to admit. That became a kind of joke in the area. Whenever he passed by, someone would whisper, "There goes the scrap player." Sometimes he would force himself to smile, as if the nickname didn't matter. Other times, when no one was watching, he would sit behind the repair shop and let his fingers rest on the damaged keys, wishing he had something better. Not expensive, not fancy, just something whole. Despite everything, he never stopped playing. Even when the power cord finally stopped working, he continued tapping silent patterns on the keys. He imagined how the music would sound if every note worked. Sometimes he closed his eyes and pictured himself on a real stage. Other times he imagined sitting at a grand piano, the kind he had only seen in pictures or through shop windows. But every time he opened his eyes, there he was again, sitting on a wooden crate, surrounded by discarded metal and old tools. His mother worked long hours at a nearby bakery, and his father did odd jobs around the neighborhood. They didn't have much, but they always tried to make sure their children had what they needed. Still, a proper musical instrument was far beyond what they could manage. He never asked them for one. He didn't want to add another burden to the list of things they worried about. At night, he often lay awake, listening to the distant hum of the city. He sometimes tapped his fingers gently against the side of his bed, pretending he was playing a soft melody. He dreamed of sound, even when the world around him was quiet. One afternoon, while he was playing behind the repair shop, something unusual happened. An older woman from the neighborhood was walking by with a small shopping bag. She wasn't someone who talked much or got involved in the noisy conversations on the street. Most people only saw her when she went to the market or attended a community event. She was gentle in her movements, always polite, and always watching the world around her with quiet eyes. That day, instead of walking past him like everyone else, she stopped. He didn't notice at first. He was too focused on the keyboard, trying to coax a simple tune from the few keys that worked. When he finally looked up, he almost jumped. She was standing just a few steps away, listening. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, embarrassed. "I didn't see you there." "That's all right," she replied softly. "I was just listening." He looked down at the broken keyboard and shrugged. It's not much. Most of it doesn't work. Even so, she said, you play with a lot of feeling. No one had ever said something like that to him before. Most people only noticed the broken keys or the strange sound. No one talked about feeling. He didn't know how to respond, so he just gave a small smile. How long have you been playing this? She asked. A while, he said. I found it here. I just practice when I can. She looked at the keyboard for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Then she lifted her eyes and said, Would you show me something? Anything you like. He hesitated. Playing in front of someone felt different from playing alone. But her face was so calm and encouraging that he found himself nodding. He placed his fingers on the few working keys and began to play a short tune he often repeated when he was alone. It wasn't perfect, and some notes didn't sound right, but he played from the heart. When he finished, she didn't clap or laugh or pity him. She just looked at him with a warm expression and said, You have talent. Real talent. His eyes widened. Me? Really? Yes, she replied. It's clear. You love music, and that love shows in the way you play, even on this broken thing. He didn't know what to say. Compliments were rare in his world, and hearing something so kind felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory. After a moment, she asked, Have you ever played on a real piano? He shook his head quickly. No, never. I've only seen one at the community hall once, but I didn't touch it. She nodded slowly, as if she expected that answer. Then she said, I have an old piano at my home. It's not new, but it works. If you want, you can come and practice on it. The words hit him like a shock dot practice. On a real piano? He wasn't sure he heard her correctly. Really? You would let me use it? She smiled gently. Yes, music is meant to be shared. And it would make me happy to see you play something beautiful on an instrument that deserves your hands. His heart raced. For a moment he couldn't speak. He looked down at his broken keyboard, the chipped edges, the missing keys, the faded letters. Then he looked up again. I would love that, he said softly. I really would. Come by tomorrow evening, she said. I'll be home. When she walked away, he sat still for a long time. The street around him was noisy as usual, but he felt as if a different kind of sound was ringing inside him, a hopeful one. A sound he didn't know how to describe. Later that night, he lay awake again, but this time he wasn't tapping imaginary notes. He was imagining himself sitting in front of a real piano. He wondered what it would feel like to press keys that responded to every touch. He wondered how the sound would fill a room. He wondered if he could actually learn to play something beautiful. He didn't tell anyone about the invitation. Not his parents, not the kids who teased him, not even the friends who sometimes sat with him in the alley. This moment felt fragile, like something too precious to share just yet. It was his own secret. The next day moved slowly. He helped his mother with errands, did his chores, and tried to keep himself busy. The evening felt forever away. He glanced at the clock again and again, waiting for the right time to leave. Finally, as the sun dipped and the street lights flickered on, he walked quietly to the older woman's home. It was a small house tucked between larger buildings. The paint was fading, but the place felt warm and lived in. He knocked softly on the door, and she opened it with a welcoming smile. Come in, she said, inside. The home was simple but full of memories, framed photos, a shelf of books, and a few decorative pieces that looked older than him. But his eyes were drawn immediately to the corner of the room where the piano stood. It wasn't new, as she said. The wood was slightly worn, and the bench had a loose thread on the side. But to him, it looked like the grandest thing in the world. Go ahead, she encouraged. He sat down carefully, almost afraid to touch it. When he pressed the first key, a clear, resonant note filled the room. He froze. It didn't buzz, didn't crackle, didn't fade. It rang out like a piece of magic. He pressed another, then another dot, and for the first time in his life, he played music that sounded whole. The older woman watched him quietly, letting him explore, letting him feel what real sound was. For him, the world outside faded. The only thing that existed was the piano beneath his fingertips. He didn't say it out loud, but in that moment he knew. His life had just changed. He returned the next evening just like the older woman had asked him to, but this time his steps were slower and more thoughtful. The excitement he felt the first day was still there, but now it mixed with a strange nervousness. What if she changed her mind? What if she realized he wasn't good enough? He kept thinking about the comments of the kids in the neighborhood, the laughter, the teasing. Even though her kindness gave him hope, there was still a part of him that feared everything might slip away. When he reached her door, he breathed deeply before knocking. As soon as she opened the door and smiled at him, some of his fear faded. Her smile had a calming way of telling him, "You're welcome here." She stepped aside, letting him walk inside. The piano was in the same corner as yesterday. It felt almost unreal to see it again, like a dream that somehow followed him into the real world. He sat down slowly, letting his fingers rest gently on the keys. He didn't press them yet. He just felt their smooth surface and allowed himself to soak in the moment. "You can start whenever you're ready," she said, sitting in a nearby chair. He finally pressed a key, and again the sound filled the room like something alive. He played a few simple notes and then looked at her. "Can I try that tune I practiced yesterday?" he asked softly. "Of course," she said. He played the same short melody he always played on his broken keyboard. But this time it sounded different, complete, real. The richer sound made him slow down, pay attention to every note, and feel the music in a way he never could before. When he finished, she nodded gently. "You have a natural sense of rhythm," she told him. "That's something many people struggle with, even when they take lessons." He felt his cheeks warm. He wasn't used to compliments, and he didn't know how to accept them without feeling shy. "Do you play too?" he asked her. She smiled a little at the question. "I used to," she said. "A long time ago. When I was younger, I played at small events. But life became busy, and the piano became something I kept only from memory." He listened closely. The way she spoke about it made him wonder how much she missed it. Maybe she had stopped not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. He could feel a quiet sadness in her voice, the kind that comes from leaving behind something you once loved. "Why did you stop?" he asked gently. She looked at the piano for a moment before answering. "Responsibilities," she said. "Family, work, time. Sometimes life changes the things we hold on to. But music never really leaves a person. It just waits." He thought about that for a while. If music waited for her, then maybe it waited for him too. She stood up and walked to the piano. She placed her fingers on the keys, hesitated, then played a few soft notes. Her hands moved slowly at first, almost unsure, but then her fingers began to glide with a memory that hadn't faded. The music wasn't loud or showy, but gentle and calming. It reminded him of a quiet afternoon breeze. When she stopped, she looked at him with a shy smile. "I'm a little rusty." "No," he said quickly. "It was beautiful." She chuckled softly at his sincerity. "Well," she said, "if I'm going to help you, I should practice a bit myself." He couldn't believe what he was hearing. She wanted to help him, really help him. He wasn't sure why, but he didn't question it. Maybe she saw something in him that no one else bothered to notice. She handed him a small notebook. "This was mine," she said. "There are basic exercises inside. We can start with these. They'll help you strengthen your fingers and understand more than just melodies." He opened the notebook carefully. The pages were slightly yellowed with time, but the writing was neat. There were simple note patterns, small drawings of keyboard arrangements, and little reminders written in the margins. "Try this one," she said. Pointing to a short pattern on the first page, he placed his fingers on the keys and tried to follow the pattern. At first, he struggled. His fingers weren't used to moving so quickly or independently. Sometimes he pressed the wrong key. Sometimes he hesitated too long. But she didn't get impatient. She never raised her voice or rushed him. She simply corrected him gently and encouraged him to keep going. "Take your time," she reminded him. "The goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to understand." He repeated the pattern again and again. Slowly, the hesitation in his hands began to fade. Instead of guessing where the notes were, he started learning their places. Instead of moving awkwardly, his fingers began to relax. When he finally played the pattern without mistakes, he looked up at her with a small spark of pride in his eyes. "See?" she said. "You're learning already." He smiled. It felt like the first real accomplishment he had in a long time. The next few days turned into a routine. Every evening, after finishing his chores, he would walk to her home. Each time he arrived, she greeted him with the same warm smile, and the piano was always waiting in the corner. Some days they practiced scales. Some days she taught him how to move his hands smoothly across the keys. Other days she let him experiment with melodies so he could find his own sound. She never pushed him too fast, and she never let him feel discouraged. She treated him like someone capable, someone worth teaching. One evening, he arrived early. She was in the kitchen preparing tea and called out to him, "You can warm up on your own for a few minutes." He sat at the piano and played the simple melody that had become his comfort tune. But something unexpected happened that day. He added a few extra notes without thinking, then a short variation, then an entirely new phrase. He wasn't copying anything. He was creating something new, something that belonged only to him. The sound filled the room in a way that surprised even him. When she walked in holding 2 cups of tea, she stopped and listened. When he finished, she set the cups down and said, "You're creating your own music. That is not something you can teach. It comes from inside." He blushed again, unsure how to respond. He never thought about creating his own music. He just played what he felt. As days turned into weeks, his confidence grew. The fear that once clung to his fingers slowly loosened its hold. He started sitting straighter, playing longer pieces, and even attempting difficult patterns she hadn't assigned yet. One night, after a particularly good practice session, she said, "There is a community talent night coming soon. People from the neighborhood will perform. Have you heard about it?" He nodded. It was the same event he always avoided, the one where people laughed at beginners and whispered about anyone who tried something unusual. "I think you should perform," she said. His heart almost stopped. "Me? No, I don't think I can." "You can," she replied. "You've been practicing hard, and you have something to show." He shook his head. "Everyone will laugh. They always do. They call me the scrap player. If I go on stage, they'll say worse things." She walked closer and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "They laughed because they never heard you play. They judged you without knowing your heart. Let them hear you once. Just once. The rest will change." Her words stayed with him long after he left her home that night. He walked slowly through the streets, listening to the familiar city sounds, but everything felt different. He kept thinking about her belief in him. Why did she trust him so much? Why did she care? When he reached home, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He tried to imagine himself standing on a stage, in front of people who never expected anything from him. His chest tightened with fear, but also with a feeling he wasn't used to, possibility. Maybe he could. The next evening, when he returned to her home, she didn't bring up the talent night again. She simply continued their lessons. But he couldn't stop thinking about it, Dot. After an hour of practice, he finally gathered enough courage to speak. I think. He began, his voice low. I think I want to try. She looked at him with a gentle smile. I knew you would. He felt nervous, but also proud. For the first time, he was choosing to face something instead of running from it. She helped him pick a piece to perform. She suggested he play the melody he created himself, the one that came from his heart. Music is strongest when it is honest, she said. And your melody is honest. He practiced every evening, pouring all his feelings into the keys. The broken keyboard behind the repair shop no longer felt like the place where his journey started. It felt like the reminder of how far he had come. He wasn't just playing for scraps anymore. He was playing for something bigger, hope. The day of the talent night came faster than he expected. For weeks, he had practiced the same melody over and over until it felt like a part of him. At first, he stumbled through the notes, unsure and shaky. But as the days passed, the melody grew stronger, cleaner, and fuller. Now, as he stood outside the community hall, the music still echoed inside his mind, but his hands trembled. The hall was brighter than he remembered. Yellow lights hung from the ceiling, and people filled the seats, talking loudly, laughing, and greeting neighbors. Children ran up and down the aisles, ignoring the parents who tried to keep them still. Performers waited near the stage, some adjusting their outfits, others rehearsing lines or songs under their breath. Everyone looked excited, proud, ready to show something. He stood near the wall, quietly holding his breath. The older woman who had been teaching him arrived shortly after. She placed a reassuring hand on his arm and said, Don't worry. You've practiced enough. Just play with your heart. He nodded, but the fear inside him kept growing. He wasn't afraid of the stage itself. He was afraid of the people. The same people who teased him in the streets, who laughed at his old keyboard, who called him the scrap player. He could already imagine their whispers. There he is. Let's see what the scrap player can do now. Maybe he'll break the piano. He swallowed hard and tried to push the thoughts away. As the event started, he took a seat in the back corner. Performers went on one by one. There were dancers, singers, kids reciting poems, and even a group presenting a short comedy act. The audience cheered and clapped for each performance, some louder than others, but he couldn't focus. His hands rested on his knees, shaking slightly. He kept rubbing them together, as if warmth would somehow calm the nervousness. The older woman sat beside him, watching him quietly without forcing conversation. She knew the storm inside him. She had seen it in many students before. When the host finally announced a short break, the judges gathered papers at their table. The audience moved around, stretching their legs, grabbing snacks, and chatting loudly. He felt his stomach twist. He knew his turn would come right after the break. He closed his eyes and tried to breathe deeply. You're ready, the older woman whispered. I've heard you play. They haven't. That's the only difference. But what if I mess up? He said softly. Then you start again, she answered calmly. The stage is not a battle. It's a place to share who you are. He wanted to believe her. He really did. When the break ended, the host returned to the stage with a bright smile and a microphone in hand. Welcome back, everyone. Now our next performer will be a young boy from the neighborhood. Some of you may know him. Let's give him a warm welcome. The host said his name, and the sound of people shifting in their seats filled the room. He felt dozens of eyes turn toward him at once. His body froze for a second. The older woman leaned close and whispered, Go. He stood up slowly, feeling as though the ground beneath him had turned soft and unsteady. His legs felt heavier with every step he took toward the stage. The whispers began as soon as he appeared near the front rows. "Isn't that the scrap player? What's he doing here? He's going to embarrass himself." Some laughed under their breath. Others snickered openly. A few people even nudged the person beside them as if sharing a joke. The judges, who had been writing notes on their sheets, glanced at him and then exchanged doubtful looks. He tried not to look at anyone. Instead, he focused on the piano in the center of the stage. It was cleaner and newer than the one he practiced on, but similar enough to feel familiar. Still, the room felt too big, too bright, too loud. When he reached the bench, his hands trembled again. He sat down carefully, trying to steady himself. From where he sat, he could see the audience more clearly. Some leaned forward with curiosity. Others leaned back with smirks on their faces. A group of kids whispered and giggled. And the older woman stood near the side of the stage, giving him a calm nod. He tried to return the nod, but his breath caught in his chest. For a moment, he thought about standing up and walking away. Then he remembered all the hours he practiced, all the times he dreamed of playing something real, something whole. He remembered the older woman's kindness, her patience, the belief she held in her eyes every time she watched him play. He remembered how he felt when he first touched the real piano, as if sound itself opened a door inside him. Slowly, he lifted his hands to the keys. The hall went silent. He pressed the first note. It rang clearly through the room. He pressed another, and another. The melody started softly, almost like a whisper. His fingers shook, but they remembered the pattern. They remembered the practice. They remembered the feeling. At first, he played carefully, afraid of making a mistake. But as the melody continued, something shifted. The sound of the piano began to drown out the echoes of laughter and whispers in his mind. The music became bigger than his fear. He took a slow breath and allowed himself to feel each note. His melody grew stronger, warm, emotional, honest. It wasn't a perfect performance. He pressed one wrong note, then another. But he didn't stop. He kept going, letting the music flow from him the way he practiced every evening. The audience leaned in. Their smiles faded. Their whispers died. Some adults blinked, surprised by the depth of sound coming from someone so quiet and unnoticed. Even the judges, who had looked doubtful earlier, now sat still and attentive. Halfway through the piece, something remarkable happened. He forgot he was on stage. He forgot he was being watched. He forgot the nicknames, the teasing, the broken keyboard behind the repair shop. In that moment, it was just him and the music. The melody carried everything he felt, the loneliness, the hope, the dreams that he never said out loud. People who had laughed when he stepped on stage now sat silently, their faces softened. Some even leaned closer, as if afraid to miss a single note. The older woman watched from the side of the stage. Tears gathered in her eyes. Not because the performance was perfect, but because she saw courage in every note. She saw how far he had come. She saw the boy who once played on a broken keyboard, now filling a room with music that touched hearts. When he played the final chord, there was a long, breathless moment of stillness. Then the hall erupted into applause. It wasn't forced or polite. It was real. People stood. Some cheered. Some clapped slowly with awe. Even the kids who teased him looked stunned, unable to believe what they just heard. He didn't know what to do. He simply sat there, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. It felt unreal, like a dream too big for him to hold. The host came on stage, beaming. That was incredible, he exclaimed. Let's give him another round of applause. The audience responded with even louder clapping. He stood up slowly, unsure of how to react. He glanced toward the older woman, and she nodded at him with the gentlest smile he had ever seen. He felt a rush of relief and happiness, so strong that his chest tightened as he stepped off the stage. People reached out to him. "That was amazing," someone said. "Where did you learn to play like that? You've got real talent. You surprised us all." Their voices blended together, and for the first time in his life, none of the comments hurt. They didn't mock him. They didn't laugh. They didn't call him the scrap player. He walked toward the older woman, who waited for him near the side of the hall. When he reached her, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did beautifully," she said. He looked at her, still overwhelmed, still shaking from the emotion of the moment. "I was so scared," he admitted in a soft voice. "I know," she replied. "But you faced it. That's what matters." He glanced back at the stage, where the piano still sat under the lights. The same piano that had once felt intimidating now felt like home as the applause faded and the next performer prepared to take the stage. He realized something important. He didn't just prove the crowd wrong. He proved something to himself, that the nickname he wore for so long didn't define him. The broken keyboard didn't define him. The laughter didn't define him. His music did. He walked out of the hall with the older woman beside him, and for the first time in a long time, he felt taller, stronger, seen. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. In the days that followed, the news of the girl's unexpected performance traveled through the town like a quiet spark, turning into a warm flame. People who had never cared about the little food stall or the boy who played on makeshift instruments suddenly found themselves talking about them. Some spoke with admiration, some with surprise, and some with curiosity they had ignored for years. But for the boy and the girl, life moved at its own pace, shaped less by the voices of others and more by the bond they were slowly building. The girl continued visiting the stall every afternoon. She no longer came with hesitation or shyness. Instead, she arrived with a soft smile, carrying her school bag on one shoulder, and sometimes holding a small notebook where she wrote down ideas for melodies. The boy noticed that she never walked past anyone without greeting them politely, no matter how cold or judgmental their expression had once been. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was simply who she was: gentle, humble, and curious about people, even when they didn't treat her kindly. The stall owner, the older man who had taken the boy in, began noticing the change too. The boy worked with a different kind of energy now. He had always been hardworking, but lately there was a new spark in him. He prepared food faster, stayed focused longer, and even found time to clean the instruments he kept near the back of the stall. These instruments were old and worn out, some close to breaking, but he took care of them like they were priceless. One evening, after the dinner rush ended, the older man sat beside the boy while he wiped down the counter. "You seem lighter these days," a man said, not looking directly at him. "Like someone took a weight off your chest." The boy shrugged, but a small smile appeared on his face. "Maybe because I finally met someone who sees beyond the scraps." The older man nodded. "She has a good heart. It's rare." The boy didn't reply, but his smile widened. He wasn't used to being recognized in that way. Not by adults, not by strangers, and certainly not by someone his age. The next afternoon, the girl arrived earlier than usual. She seemed excited about something, but she tried her best to act calm. The boy, who was preparing plates behind the counter, immediately sensed something different in her behavior. "What happened?" he asked, noticing the notebook clutched tightly in her hands. "I have something to show you," she said quietly, her eyes shining. She handed him the notebook. On the first page was a carefully drawn piano keyboard, and beneath it were musical notes arranged neatly above a short melody. The boy studied it, his eyebrows slowly rising. "You wrote this?" he asked. She nodded. Last night. I couldn't sleep because I kept hearing the tune you played at the school. I wanted to write something that fits with your style. Something simple, but honest. The boy felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. No one had ever composed something for him. No one had ever taken his music seriously enough to study his sound, let alone write a melody inspired by it. Before he could respond, the girl continued, I want to play this with you. Maybe not on a real stage. Maybe just here. But I want to hear how it sounds when we combine your rhythm with my keys. Her voice wasn't loud, but carried a quiet confidence that made him feel grounded. He looked around the stall. It wasn't the prettiest place, old metal counters, faded plastic chairs, and the constant scent of fried dough, but somehow, in that moment, it felt like the perfect place. Yes, he said softly. Let's do it. From that day on, the two practiced together whenever they found spare moments. The boy tapped rhythms on the small wooden crate he used as a percussion board, and the girl played on an improvised keyboard app on her phone, sometimes borrowing the old electric keyboard her neighbor kept in a storeroom. It wasn't perfect. The keys stuck sometimes, and the sound crackled. But they didn't let that stop them. The imperfections made the practice feel even more real. One afternoon, while they practiced behind the stall, a group of teenagers who used to mock the boy walked past. At first, the boy froze, expecting the usual comments. The girl noticed the tension in his shoulders and gently placed her hand near his, not touching him, but close enough to remind him that he wasn't alone. To their surprise, the teenagers didn't laugh. They paused, listened for a few seconds, and one of them nodded before saying, Not bad. The boy blinked. He wasn't sure how to respond. The girl just smiled politely, as if acknowledging a passing compliment from strangers. When the group walked away, the boy let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. They never said anything that kind before, he murmured. Maybe they finally heard you, she replied. It was a simple sentence, but it stayed with him. Later that week, an unexpected visitor came to the stall. It was the school's music instructor, the same woman who had watched the girl's performance that day and left in quiet awe. She approached slowly, waiting until the customers finished their orders. The boy straightened up nervously, not used to adults from the school taking interest in him. I've been hoping to find you both together, she said gently. I couldn't stop thinking about that performance. The girl lowered her gaze shyly, but the instructor smiled. I want to ask something, the woman continued. Our school is holding a small community concert next weekend. Nothing big, just students and local performers. I would like to invite both of you to play. The boy's hands froze. His heart raced. Me? He asked quietly. I'm not a student. That doesn't matter, she said. Music doesn't care about uniforms. It cares about soul. And you have plenty of it. The girl's eyes sparkled with excitement, but she waited for the boy to speak first. He hesitated. Not because he didn't want to perform, but because deep inside, a familiar fear rose, fear of being judged again, mocked, or dismissed. He had lived too many years being invisible, and becoming visible felt both thrilling and terrifying. Sensing his hesitation, the instructor added, There is no pressure, and there is no competition. Just a chance to share what you already carry inside. The girl stepped closer to him, her voice soft but certain. We can do it, together. And that word together dissolved his doubt. He nodded slowly. Okay, we'll play. Over the next few days, their practice grew more focused. They rehearsed the girl's melody until every note felt like it belonged to them both. The boy refined the rhythm, tapping lighter or heavier, depending on the emotion of the moment. They experimented with pauses, crescendos, and soft transitions that seemed to flow naturally. One evening, after hours of practicing, The girl suggested something new. "What if we also play that tune you taught me the first day?" she asked with a gentle smile. "The one you made when you were younger." He looked surprised. "You remember that?" "I remember everything you play," she replied simply. He didn't know what to say to that. It was the kindest thing he had ever heard, and he held on to it like a small treasure. The boy agreed, and they worked on merging the two melodies into a single piece, a blend of his raw rhythm and her soft, emotional chords. It wasn't perfect, but it had heart. And that was enough. The night before the concert, the boy couldn't sleep. He lay awake in the small room behind the stall, listening to the noise of distant traffic and the rustling of the trees outside. He felt nervous, hopeful, afraid, excited all at once. He thought about the people who used to mock him, the ones who never saw more than a kid scraping through life. He thought about the older man who took him in, the girl who believed in him, and the unexpected kindness that had begun shaping his days. He whispered to himself, "Maybe this time they'll hear me." Meanwhile, in her home, the girl practiced silently on her small keyboard, her fingers trembling slightly from anticipation. She looked at the notebook where she had written the melody and traced the notes with her fingertip. "He said he plays for scraps," she murmured softly. "But tomorrow, he'll play for something bigger." Both of them drifted into sleep, not knowing what tomorrow would bring, but holding on to the hope that for once their music would speak louder than their struggles. And that hope, quiet, fragile, but powerful, was enough to guide them to the next morning. The morning of the concert arrived with a calm sky and a gentle breeze, as if the world itself wanted to give the boy and the girl a quiet push forward. The community center wasn't anything fancy, just a long hall with rows of foldable chairs, soft lights hanging from wires, and a small stage made of wooden planks. But to them, it felt bigger than any concert hall. It felt like a door they had been walking toward for a long time. The boy arrived early with the older man from the stall. The man didn't say much, but his presence alone gave strength. He carried a small bag with the boy's percussion board inside, the same wooden surface the boy had played on for years. The boy touched it gently, as if reminding himself of where he had come from. When the girl arrived, her smile eased the tension inside him. She wore simple clothes, nothing grand or shiny, just the same comfortable outfit she always wore when she practiced. But there was something different about her today. Her eyes were calm, steady, focused. "Ready?" she asked softly. The boy nodded, even though his heart was pounding. The hall slowly filled with people, students, parents, neighbors, and even strangers who came because they heard about a girl whose piano made judges cry. Every seat seemed to bring a new face, and soon the room was full of murmurs, laughter, and the shifting of feet. The boy recognized some of the teenagers who used to laugh at him. They stood near the back, whispering among themselves. For a moment, old fear crept into his chest. He remembered all the times they had mocked him, all the times he felt invisible or worthless. But then the girl stepped beside him, adjusting the sheet of music in her notebook. "You don't have to worry," she whispered. "Just play like we always do. Just play." It sounded so simple, yet it carried the weight of everything he had lived through. Soon, the lights dimmed slightly. The instructor stepped onto the stage and spoke into a microphone, welcoming everyone to the small community concert. One by one, students performed their pieces. Some sang, some played guitar, some read poetry. Each performance received claps and warm cheers. But the boy's hands stayed cold as ice. When the instructor finally said, "Our next performers are two young musicians who will share an original piece," he felt his breath catch. The girl took his hand for a second, not tightly, just enough to steady him, and guided him toward the stage. The applause wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was enough to fill the hall with expectation. On the stage, the girls sat at the electric piano provided for the event. It wasn't the smooth, polished kind found in rich schools, but it was better than anything she had practiced on in weeks. The boy took his place beside her with his percussion board balanced on his lap. For a moment, everything went quiet. He could hear the faint hum of the lights, the distant cough of someone in the audience, the rustle of paper, and the soft rhythm of his own heartbeat. Then the girl nodded. She placed her fingers gently on the keys and began with the melody she had written, the soft, thoughtful tune inspired by the boy's rhythms. It started slow, like a story opening its first page. Her touch was steady and warm, each note floating through the room like a gentle wind. The boy listened for a few beats, letting the music wrap around him, reminding him of all the moments they had built together. Then he joined in, tapping lightly at first. His rhythm blended with her notes, as if they had been written for each other. The hall became completely silent. People leaned forward in their chairs, eyes fixed, breaths held. Even those who once doubted or teased him seemed unable to look away. As the piece grew, the girl switched seamlessly into the older tune, the one the boy had created long before she ever knew him. A tune he had played on broken crates, empty cans, and tabletops while the world ignored him. When she played it, something inside the boy cracked open. It was as if she was telling his story for him. He responded with stronger rhythms, his hands moving with confidence he never knew he had. The sounds echoed off the wooden walls, filling the room with something raw but honest. And then, without planning it, they both slowed down at the same moment. The girl looked at him. He looked at her. They played the final part together, merging their tunes into one emotional wave. It wasn't perfect. A few notes shook. His rhythm wavered once. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the truth inside the music, a truth the whole room could feel. And when the last note faded, silence hung in the air for several long seconds. Then the applause erupted. It wasn't polite. It wasn't forced. It was real, loud, sincere, overwhelming. People stood up, clapping hard, cheering, calling out words the boy had never heard directed at him before. In the middle of the applause, the boy lowered his head, stunned. The girl leaned close and whispered, "They heard you." He lifted his head slightly and let her words sink in. For the first time in his life, he felt seen not as a kid living on scraps, not as someone to be mocked or pitied, but as a musician. The instructor stepped back onto the stage, wiping the corner of her eye. She spoke softly into the microphone. "That," she said, "is the kind of music that reminds us why we teach, why we listen, and why we never judge a child by what they lack. Thank you both." The applause grew again. After they walked off the stage, people surrounded them. Some offered compliments, others asked questions, and even the teenagers who once made fun of him approached shyly. "You were actually amazing," one of them said, scratching his head. The boy simply smiled. For the first time, their words didn't sting. They didn't stir old memories or old wounds. They were just words from people who finally saw him differently. Later, when the crowd thinned, the older man from the stall walked up and placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. His eyes said more than any speech could. "You didn't just play," he said quietly. "You proved something to them and to yourself." The boy swallowed hard. "I couldn't have done it alone." The older man looked at the girl and nodded respectfully. Good partners make strong music. After the event, the girl pulled the boy outside for some fresh air. The evening sky was painted in shades of gold and orange, slowly turning into dusk. The streets were quieter now, and the cool breeze brushed past them gently. "I want to tell you something," the girl said, looking down at her hands. "When I first heard you tapping that rhythm at the stall, I thought you were just passing time. But then I realized something. You never played for scraps. You played from your heart. People misunderstood you because they never listened. The boy looked at her quietly, unsure of how to respond. She continued, Today they listened, and they understood, and they won't forget. He breathed in deeply, feeling lighter than he had in years. I didn't know I could feel this way, he said softly. Like I matter. You always mattered, she replied gently. You just needed a moment to show it. They walked slowly toward the stall, talking about future melodies, future ideas, and the possibility of performing again someday. The boy felt something he had never felt before, not just hope, but direction. That night, when he returned to his small room behind the stall, he didn't pick up his percussion board right away. Instead, he sat quietly, thinking about everything that had happened, the laughter he once endured, the struggles, the loneliness, the moment he met the girl, the first notes they shared, the fears he overcame, and the applause that washed over him. He whispered to himself, I used to play for scraps, but now I play for something real. And for the first time, he believed it fully. He placed his hand on his old percussion board and smiled, not because it was worn out or part of his past, but because it had carried him to this point. Tomorrow, he knew, he would pick it up again, not because he needed to prove anything, but because he loved the sound it made. The world had changed for him. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a steady, honest way, like a quiet song growing into something beautiful. And as he drifted to sleep that night, he knew this was only the beginning.